Hello, and welcome back to the Prince William Sound Natural History Symposium. My name is Heather Tham, and I'll be your host for this final session. We have 3 presentations during this session. For each of these talks, feel free to make any comments in the chat box, and if you have questions specifically for the presenters, please put those down in the Ask a Question tab down here somewhere. Our first presenter is Rob Kaler, who will present on marine birds of Prince William Sound. Rob Kaler is a wildlife biologist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Migratory Bird Management Office based in Anchorage. He leads several projects in Prince William Sound, including monitoring population trends of marine birds following the 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill. He also is responsible for studying the recovery of pigeon guillemots at the Naked Island Group following the removal of introduced mink. I'm excited to welcome Rob Kaler.
All right. Can you hear me? It looks like it's good. All right, thank you, Heather. Yep, Rob Kaler. So I'll be talking about marine birds in Prince William Sound today, specifically population trends for a couple species groups, and then pigeon guillemots and actually parakeet auklets, a little bit of work that we had a graduate student working on at the Naked Island Group, which includes some social attraction. So, you are sharing your screen. Okay, good. So again, I'm with Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm based here in Anchorage, and I get to lead several projects for the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustees Council. And those one of those programs goes to Gulf Watch Alaska, which is part of a larger project, comprehensive across all of Prince William Sound, and then the Guillemot Restoration Project. So here's our tufted puffin, the ironclad Harley-Davidson of Seabirds. So very regal in its dark feathers with its wild plumes. But we also just talk about marine birds in general. So while I'm a seabird specialist, I'm interested in all the birds that happen to be hanging out along the near shore. So that includes oyster catchers and great blue herons, as well as some of the birds that are further offshore, like the Arctic terns, that I think most of us know make quite a migration route to the south of Tierra del Fuego in South America, and then a lot of other marine birds. So they're all just kind of very fascinating, and for reasons I'll explain, just kind of a very interesting focal organism to monitor and work with. So I feel very fortunate. Seabirds in general include the penguins, which are in the southern hemisphere. We, of course, don't have any of those, but also the procalliforms, so the albatross and the fulmars and the storm petrels. We don't so much see albatross and fulmars in Prince William Sound. They're usually offshore, but in the vicinity of Prince William Sound. But we do see storm petrels that make their way into Prince William Sound. And so these actually are the tube noses, as they've one of their nicknames are, and that's because they actually excrete salt water through their nose, through the nares. There's also the pelicaniforms. We don't have pelicans up here, of course, but we do have the cormorant. So this is a fish pursuit diving near shore bird. And in Alaska, we do have Brandt's cormorants in southeast, but most of our birds are pelagic cormorants in Prince William Sound, and some red-faced and double-crested cormorants. And then the chorogiforms, the gulls, the terns, and the auks, and those auks including the puffins and the murres. And so seabird life history, a lot of them nest in very large colonies, up to a few million, and those are actually some of the auklets and the storm petrels. They can nest in just huge clouds, and they only come at dawn and dusk back to their nest sites. And those nest sites are usually in crevices. But in general, we say seabirds are very colonial. They are delayed in maturing before they breed. So once they make it through the egg period, then they actually fledge to the water. It's going to be another 4 to 5 years before they actually come back and begin breeding themselves. So that's quite a delayed period for an animal to have to survive in the wild and then come back and breed. And they are relatively long-lived. So one example would be Wisdom, the Laysan albatross, which breeds in Hawaii. She's over 60 years and still breeding. But most of these birds, common murres, for example, are about 20 years, they'll live to be about 20 years. So with that, they lay a single egg, typically, of this group. So one egg not until after they're 4 or 5 years of age. And then that egg represents both their female or male and female partners. So, and then that chick, once it's being incubated, so both adults, male and female, incubate that egg, it's very slow to develop. So some of those incubation periods, it can be 21 days or even more in the case of storm petrels, longer incubation period because they'll actually leave to go out and feed. So in case of storm petrel, very hardy. And then once that chick hatches, it's actually often in the nest for another 30, 40 days. And in the case of tufted puffins, can be upwards of 60 days, and the storm petrels even longer. And they can forage great distances from that nest site to get the food. And so overall, there's just overall a very low reproductive potential for these birds. So all the challenges of the ocean have made it such that they're kind of slow to breed, and but they live longer, and they also have fewer young. So that's kind of the quote down to the lower right corner there. And then monitoring seabirds. Why do we monitor seabirds in Alaska? Well, we use them to monitor the changes in the ecosystem. They are indicators of the ecosystem health. They rely on fish and zooplankton and everything else, and are at nearly 3/4 of the year, only coming to shore to breed about 3 to 4 months out of the year. And even then, they're taking turns with their partner back and forth. So even then, they don't remain on land for very long. And compared to other marine organisms, they're very easy to study because they come to shore to breed. And it's at that breeding sites that we know most of our information and that we attempt to monitor population trends. Although we also do population counts at sea for densities of birds. But really the gold standard is monitoring them at their colonies, where we can also understand some of their food. And so common prey items of seabirds in Alaska include Pacific sandlance and capelin. Sandlance and capelin are very nutrient rich, high in calories. But for sandlance, there's good years and there's bad years. And then for cold water loving capelin, they've actually been declining since a significant shift in ocean temperatures in 1976, where the ocean waters around Alaska went from a cold temperature to a warming temperature. And so because fish are so sensitive to temperature of the water, when the capelin declined, we see juvenile walleye pollock increasing, or species like juvenile walleye pollock. And so while those pollock are lower in quality, they're actually increasing in numbers following that 1976 regime shift. But that means with lower quality that birds are going to have to work harder to consume more of to meet their caloric needs. One thing that I mentioned, most of what we know about seabirds and their diet is found from nesting sites at the colonies. But what we are seeing based on things like fatty acid analysis, as well as stable isotopes, is that a lot of these seabirds are probably eating a lot more euphausids and copepods than we thought previously. And this is probably during the winter period, which is from a life history period, life cycle wise, that's the most challenging time for these guys. So we're learning a lot more about that and finding that they're probably eating a lot more euphausids and copepods. That would be out over the continental shelf in the winter. And so as an example, the common murre, the photo in the lower right corner, that common murre weighs about 1,000 grams, and that bird needs to consume somewhere between 10 and 30% of their body mass per day, which can be about anywhere from 90 to 300 fish per day, depending on the size of the fish and the caloric value of that fish. So that's a lot of fishing, and specifically, that's a lot of catching. I think we all know that I go out and I fish a lot, but I don't catch a lot. So these murres are working very hard. And so when you have a major shift in the ocean temperature, like we saw 2014 to 16, the marine heat wave, we see a lot of changes in their ability to catch these fish. And so, as I mentioned, I'm partially funded through the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustees Council, and specifically the Gulf Watch Alaska program. And that's the continuation of the July surveys to monitor following the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Happened in March 1989 on Bligh Reef in the northwest part of the map there. And then you see the gray area in this map indicating where the spill affected area course, the spill continued out into the Gulf of Alaska. But for what I'm talking here specifically, this is the spill affected area. And so I began working for Fish and Wildlife Service around 2010, and by 2014, I inherited the responsibility to run the July Prince William Sound marine surveys. So keeping these 3 Boston whalers, the predator, the prey, and the scavenger alive, we do Prince William Sound marine bird surveys. The transects include a shoreline transect. So in this figure, you see the red. So every area that's in red, we drive our boat 100 meters offshore, and we count all the birds 100 meters on towards the shore side and 100 meters offshore side. And that is our 200-meter wide transect. We also do a second strata, the coastal transects, and those run north-south, and those are indicated here in the green, and they basically make landfall, but you get that gradient of going offshore into deeper waters and what birds might be present in that area. And then the third strata was the pelagic. And these are 200 they're all 200-meter wide transects, 100 meters right and left of the boat, port and starboard, and counting everything that occurs 100 meters in front, to the right, to the left, and above. And so from that, we are extrapolating a density of different species of marine birds in Prince William Sound. So that survey, again, we're using these 25-foot Boston whalers traveling about 7 to 10 knots. We've got 2 observers counting, and again, we're counting everything within 100 meters of the boat as it moves forward. And so this figure here, on the left of each of this panel, you see the estimated number of total birds. This is the total population estimated for Prince William Sound. And then along the bottom is the years from 1989 to 2018. Since the COVID pandemic, I have not been able to do a survey. 2020, I was supposed to do a survey. We delayed that to 2021, and again, I will be delayed, not able to do that. But what you see here, essentially in the gray area, is the 95% confidence intervals. That's how confident we are of that point estimate. And that point estimate is indicated in black. And then the p-value at the top. So for Harlequin duck in the upper left panel, you see quite a decline starting in about 2014, probably 2012 to 2018. And that gray area is indicating how confident we are of that number. And so then you see scoters. And the way this panel is arranged, on the left side of the screen are the near shore birds. These are the birds that basically remain very close to the coast. And then as you move to the right of the panel, you go to the middle birds that are like Aleutian terns and merlets that are a bit offshore, all the way to the right, which are birds that are consistently found further offshore, not near land. And so you see these declines on these nearshore birds, even going into the middle. And then as the more pelagic or offshore birds, you see in the last 2014, 2016, 2018, an actual increase. So, and this is all estimated using 10,000 bootstrap estimates and non-parametric with linear regression. So those p-values are based on, is this trend significant? And so kind of to zoom in, I'll give you two slides here. Pigeon Guillemot is a species of interest for the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustees Council. It has not recovered following the oil spill. And we see those numbers have actually continued to decline. Same thing with merlets. And here when I say merlets, I'm grouping marbled merlets and kitlitzes. Kitlitzes merlet are generally found near up towards tidewater glaciers. And whereas marbled merlets nest solitarily in trees. And so we see just a huge decline in merlets, quite a concern, and this is a species of conservation concern for Fish and Wildlife Service. And then tufted puffins too have actually been petitioned for listing under the Endangered Species Act. So the numbers that we see, and again, the gray area is showing the confidence of our estimate, but you see over the last few years, decline in tufted puffins. So these are species of conservation concern, as well as concern for the EVOS Trustees Council. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the pelagic species, so this is the murres, the parasitic Jaegers, and storm petrel, we actually see an increase. And I suspect that this increase is owing to that the warm period that we had, essentially the blob the Northeast Pacific marine heat wave. And so these are birds that typically would be offshore or further, at least on the outside of Prince William Sound, actually moving inland, not inland, but into Prince William Sound. And I suspect likely looking for food during this warming period. And so that's the kind of the status and trends for the Prince William Sound Marine Bird Survey. A second project that I'll give you some information on is the Guillemot restoration at Naked Island. So Guillemot's at the Naked Island group. You see this figure in the lower left. On the side is the count of Guillemots. So just before, well, the late 70s, there was nearly 2,000 individual Guillemots counted at the Naked Island group, Naked, Story, and Peak. And then around the time of the oil spill, you see that there has been a decline in the number. So each dot is a count of circumnavigating the three islands. And then by the 2000, you see that there's less than probably about 60 birds. So something's happening there. And so to quickly cut to the chase, the Naked Island group, if you see in this figure here, again, population number, the estimate, is on the left side, and then year, 1980 to 2010 along the bottom. And you see that at some point, the theory is that introduced mink were released at the Naked Island group. And that was right around the period. So they initiated all the Guillemot work at Naked Island because it was just historically a big source of Guillemots in Prince William Sound. So they wanted to study it more. And that was Kathy Coolitz back in the late 70s. And then you see the oil spill in the middle, right, 1989. And then you just see this continued trajectory downward, so that by Kirsten Bixler did her master's at the Naked Island group in the late 2000s. And by then there were less than 60 Guillemot pairs nesting, or 60 individuals nesting. And so fast forward to 2012. So we got funding through the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustees Council, and actually the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, to remove mink from the Naked Island group, Naked, Story, and Peak. So here in the figure on the right side, you see from the year 2012, this is before mink were being removed, the total population here, the Naked Island group, less than 60. So 58 birds were counted in 2012. Beginning in 2014, mink were trapped and removed from the island. And that occurred all the way until 2018, where the trapping effort continued, but no mink were being trapped. There was one observation of a mink in 2017 out at Bass Harbor Island, which is actually down outside to the south of Naked Island. And since then, we have not detected any presence of mink. So we've actually continued at the high activity sites where mink were trapped in these early years, putting cameras and bait traps. And so far, we've not detected any mink. And so we see here in the orange, this is our control group, Smith, Little Smith, Seal, and Fool. And we see that those birds are actually consistent and somewhat declined towards 2020, whereas the birds in the blue, this is the Naked Island count, have actually pretty rapidly increased following mink removal. And again, remembering that the young that hatch won't actually come back to the island to breed probably for 4 or 5 years. And so this appears to be recruitment from other islands in the nearby area that's increasing this number. So overall, a huge success and really great news as we continue to monitor Guillemots at the Naked Island group. Oops, wrong direction. And so we had Sam Stark, a great graduate student. He was at Oregon State, and he completed his master's thesis in 2019. And so Sam, a lot of the information that we have on the nesting and changes in Guillemot behaviors following the removal is thanks to Sam and his crew. So they were interested in nest abundance of Guillemots as well as nest survival. And then also, oops, a little fast. And then nest substrate. So learning about the vulnerability versus non-vulnerable sites. And specifically to that, you see that the Guillemots historically had nested all the way on the fringe of the island, from the burrows on the top where it was a softer substrate to the cliff faces all the way down to the talus at the bottom. And due to the minks being able to access the burrows at the top as well as the talus nests at the bottom, The only reason probably that the guillemots have remained at the Naked Island group is due to the guillemots that nested on the cliff faces where it was inaccessible to the mink. And so just kind of a quick summary. And again, thanks to Sam for sharing this slide. You see on the left side, here's the percent number of nests. And so in 1979, thanks to Kathy Kulitz's work out there, we knew that they were, in the green is the burrow nests, the yellow is the cliff face, and then the gray is the talus. We see 25% of the nests were in the talus, another portion in the cliff face, and then a lot up in the burrowing up in the upper area. And then by 2008, when Kirsten Bixler was working out there for her master's, only 17 nests had been found, and the majority were in the cliff face exclusively. And so thanks to Sam and his work out there and the mink removal, in 2015, we see just an increase. And so by the time Sam wrapped up his master's in 2018, 52 nests, and we see that some nesting in the talus, but the majority were nesting in the cliff face and the burrows at the top. And then another one of Sam's chapters was actually social attraction using playback. So this is a ton of work that these guys put into getting batteries, solar panels, a playback system that recharge, and then mirror boxes as well as decoys. And so all of this is set up in order to, because the colonial nesting birds are so social, that this would be a way to expedite recovery following the removal of mink. And so this was done as well as using cameras. So the playback systems set up with time-lapse cameras to determine presence, absence. And so this was actually used for Arctic terns. There had been some historic nesting colonies of Arctic terns at the Naked Island group, as well as pigeon guillemots and parakeet auklets. And so the social attraction sites, you can see the diamonds represent a control where just a mat was placed down with decoys. And this is a parakeet auklet decoy. And those were put down with nest boxes, but without any acoustic playback sounds. And so that was also done for parakeet auklets as well. And then this is compared to the control islands at Fool, the green arrow on the left, and then Seal Island on the south, and the green island, or the green arrow to the south. So the results of the guillemots, the playback was actually quite positive for guillemots. Using the control versus the experiment, you see that the experiment with the broadcasting calls of guillemots elicited a lot more birds. So a detection per days of month are on the left, and then the control C1, C3, and C4. So you do see that one bird actually went to hang out with the non-vocal playback area. And then as for parakeet auklets, the same thing. So parakeet auklets have not been documented breeding at the Naked Island group for at least 10 plus years. And so you see these arrows on the lower south side, southwest part of Naked Island. These were where murrelet or auklets were actually visiting. So not a lot of activity, but there was a report of a nest attempt at experimental site 3. So very exciting and a lot of hard work. As I mentioned, dragging solar panels and batteries up to these, putting out the mats and the mirror boxes, just a ton of work. And so very positive to get to know that the pigeon guillemots were very responsive, and the parakeet auklets a little bit as well, and one actually attempting to nest. So as for a summary of that, the guillemots were very attracted to it. And we did have the first detection of a parakeet auklet at the Naked Island group for at least within the last 10 years. So that was great. But there were no nesting attempts at the experimental sites by the guillemots, and at least one nesting attempt by the parakeet auklet. So, and what we suspect is that this will take repeated years of deploying these cameras, deploying playback systems and mirror boxes in order to solicit birds to come and breed. And so with that, I thank you for your time, and I will open it up to questions. I think I can see the, yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Rob. I have well, it looks like there's one question asking about if your slides would be available, but we will be posting your videoed recording with your slides on the princewilliamsound.org website. So it will be available in the video recording. So.
Yeah. And if people want to email me, there on the slide now, I'm a Robert_Kaler, and I'm happy to share specific slides. Some of these were Sam Stark's, so I would give him full credit, of course.
Excellent. And I have a couple questions for you. Are there any other predators that would be a reason why the pigeon guillemots wouldn't be nesting in the talus after the mink were removed?
River otters would be a suspect, I think. They're omnivores. They work in the intertidal area. The mink during the winter basically get pushed down, and they'll move a bit further. So I think that would be the only other potential. There's no bears at the Naked Island group. And so, yeah, river otter would probably be the only other culprit.
Okay, cool. And then I was just curious too, is there any more information or updates on following the crash of the common murre that happened, what was that, 4 or 5 years ago? Did they ever figure out maybe what else may have been going on with them?
Yeah, no, that's, I think that, well, there's monitoring colony sites. There does seem to have been just a major shift in the fishery. And I think there's from going to like age classes 0 fish to 1s to 2s to, 3s up to adults. They, I think there's a lag between those fish and some of my colleagues at USGS Alaska Science Center, Yumi Aramitsu, for example, doing forage fish work in Prince William Sound. The subsequent years, the fish were, very small, very lean, and, what you would say not fit. So I think a lot of the birds that rely on fish are dealing with that. So whether it's even fewer fish or the fish that they do catch are actually in poor condition. And so there are continued efforts for murres, for example, to monitor populations, but not so much in Prince William Sound at their colony sites, but areas outside for Kachemak Bay, for example. So, but it is a species that we continue to keep, we want to keep our finger on the pulse of them.
Awesome. It looks like there's a question in the question box here. Do sandlands have cycles of abundance on a certain number of years?
That's a question that I could make up an answer, but I'll be honest and say I don't think so. But there's good years and there's bad years. So
awesome. And I have one more question. What is the mating or mature age for mating, and how long do pigeon guillemots versus auklets breed for? Like, what's their adult age range?
I believe 15, about 15 years. I think auklets are probably around 12 years and guillemots around 15 years. And then, for example, the common murres are closer to 20 years. So the bigger you get, the longer lived or lived you are.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that's it. Thank you so much. That was really interesting.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and hopefully get invited back next year.
Yeah, and it looks like someone, we have your email address down there so folks can contact you if they have questions.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think we are a little bit ahead of schedule. So unless you have anything to add, we'll probably take a break here for about, it's like 10 minutes before we start.
Yeah, I thought we might have started a little early, but no, nothing more to add other than keeping an eye out for everybody out there. If you see the predator, the prey, or the scavenger, be sure to say hello.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and so we'll take about a 10-minute break so folks can just hang out here. We'll just kind of silence our screens, and then our next presenter will be Louis Sass, who's going to talk about kind of the state of the glaciers in Alaska. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks.